Grace and peace to you from the God who was and who is to come. Amen. It's always daunting to have the last thing read from Scripture say, and anyone who dares to speak for God and God doesn't approve that message, that one's going to die, and then you got to get up and preach. Excited about that. So if something happens here, we know what happens. We took a group several years ago to Assisi and to Rome and to Florence and the steps of St. Francis. And when you go to the Vatican, you go to the Sistine Chapel, you see this image on the far wall behind where the high altar was. This is Michelangelo's depiction of the Great Judgment. You see Jesus, who's got kind of that light behind him in the middle, kind of a buff Jesus who's like casting out all the evil ones and welcoming in all the good ones. And so you see on to his right would be where all the people are on their way to heaven, and to his left, where he's facing at this time, are all the ones who are being snatched down into hell. And one of the people who was a bishop who actually was early on one of the people who was a patron of this work, he decided that he didn't like that there was so much nudity in this, and so he criticized. Don't criticize artists, right? Don't criticize artists because they can do this to you. This guy is he put the bishop is the guy with the snake wrapped around him. That's the guy. He put him in the picture down in the farthest, lowest corner in the most hellish place. So here's my question. Does Michelangelo have it right or wrong? Is this the gospel? That Jesus comes and he is like Santa? You know, you get good things or coal? Is it really about judging on our merits and our reward? Is heaven a merit-based system for getting in? And if it is, then I don't know what to do with everything else. In fact, I don't believe that at all. I don't believe that Jesus believed that. In fact, that was the unique teaching. You see, that image of Jesus up there is just Zeus, done in younger, buffer form. It's the same idea of reward-punishment scheme. And instead, Jesus taught something radically different about the nature of compassion and love. This is an aerial view of the synagogue in Capernaum where Jesus taught, that bigger structure over there with the little columns that were in it. That, scholars believe, was actually where today's gospel text took place. That Jesus would have gone there on the Sabbath. He would have opened the scroll. We know in Luke where he opens the scroll to Isaiah 61, and he reads, and he says this. He says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me to preach good news to the poor, release to those who are captive, and recovery of sight to the blind." And then he stops. He doesn't read the next sentence in Isaiah 61, which said, "And to proclaim a day of vengeance for God." See, Jesus and his understanding of God was far more inclusive of all of who we are. And so we hear this text today that while he's in there and people are saying, this guy's got this image of, or this teaching of authority, and then he sees this man with an unclean spirit. I would argue that there were many unclean spirits in the room that day. Just as there are many unclean spirits in this room and in this heart right now, and that's the nature of part of who we are. And Jesus comes, and he offers out this not rebuke in a negative way, but instead this welcome to this one who was suffering, who was possessed by something that was troubling him. He then welcomes him and welcomes him in. I think that there's this picture that a child created that I loved of Jesus casting out a demon. And what I like about it is that you see that the demon is is a spirit that is inside this guy, but it's not the guy. You see, Jesus doesn't cast out the person. Jesus casts out the unclean spirit. Jesus doesn't decide that there are good people and bad people. Jesus decides that there are people that are children of God, and some of us have spirits in us that need to be released. And it's painful and it's hard sometimes to do that. I know that we get caught up in the spirits of materialism or consumerism, or our ego gets in the way. I have to be right, or it's my tribe, or it's whatever it is that sort of gets in there, and that's unclean. And we do ask God, please purge me of that. Move that away from my heart. My heart is too big for that. And it keeps me captive if I think that way. We are an inclusive church. What that means, it says on our welcome statement, is that if you, whatever your racial background, whatever your gender identity, whatever your sexual orientation, whatever whether it is you're confident in your faith or whether you're completely questioning and doubting, no matter where you are welcome here. Everybody is welcome here. What is not welcome here is bigotry, but the bigot is welcome. What is not welcome here is homophobia, but the person who has struggles around the issue of including gay and lesbian people is welcome here. You see, if we're going to practice the gospel the way that Jesus teaches it, with that authority, everybody, even the people we strongly disagree with, are welcome here, and we let God work on all of us. It says that Jesus taught as one with authority. The word is exousia. I love this one because it's like Jesus tuck to the hand, demon, right? It's like casting out. But where does Jesus' authority come from? Did he go to a better school? No. Well, yes, in a way. But he went to the school of hard knocks. He was raised, identified as someone who had an illegitimate story around his birth. And so he always had people questioning his mother's integrity. He was raised in poverty and in oppression. And when he was baptized by John, he immediately went out into the wilderness and was confronting all of his inner demons for 40 days and 40 nights. You see, he did his work. He went through his rite of passage, his ritual. He had walked the walk. He didn't just have the book learning, he also had the life experience. And so when he comes back, and now this one is the one who is welcoming and teaching and casting out all those unclean things inside all of us, then you see that's what the authority is. I went to a Reimagining Religion conference on Friday, and it was fascinating because you're people of all different religions looking at what's happening in the religious landscape in America today. It was up at USC. And Rita Borges, she said this. She is an Ayurvedic therapist. So she works in the school of Ayurvedic medicine that comes out of India and Hinduism and yoga. And so what she was saying was this: only organized religion that asks you to believe without direct experience is in decline. And my mind went, that makes sense. We don't ask people anymore. We can't ask people, come in and just believe what we say without any direct experience. Instead, we have to join together and be schools of love, where we practice together. Try it out. Don't just think about loving your neighbor. Love them. Go bring them a casserole. Do something specifically that's going to benefit someone besides you and see how that changes you. Right? That kind of participatory engagement with our spirituality, I believe, is what all of us are hungry for. Religion that makes sense and has meaning, more of a spirituality of transformation than a religion of doctrine or information. And so we see these pendulum swings happening, and I think God's directing the whole thing. to lead us from this head-focused, where we come in and we can nod our heads, but then we go back in our lives and nothing's changed, to instead saying, how do I integrate all that I'm hearing in the gospel, all that I'm sharing and learning, into a spiritually active life in my work life, in the gym, in the waves, every place that I live. To move from doctrines to practices, to see love not as a noun, but as a verb, because that's how we get our authority. My chief experience of authority first happened in some ways when I was in seminary, there about a month, and the Loma Prieta earthquake happened, and this structure, the 880 freeway, collapsed on itself, and they came to the seminary and said, we need seminarians to put on clerical collars and to come down and provide help for the aid workers who are pulling bodies out of the wreckage. We need someone to be there to pray with them, if they asked anyone to pray with them. And it was the first time I put a collar on, and I looked ridiculous. I felt ridiculous. What I thought was, I have no authority to wear this. And yet then when someone came up to me and said in Spanish to me, "Bendíceme, Padre," bless me, Father. He didn't care that I was 27 and had no idea what I was doing. He didn't care that it was the first day I'd ever worn one of these funny shirts. All he wanted me to do was just say, "En el nombre de Padre, el Hijo, y el Espíritu Santo." That's all he was asking. And by doing it, I got a little glimpse into what God could do. Each of us has inside of us this power that is just waiting to be released in the world. And it's our authority. And it means we have to get beyond the fear that says, I don't know enough, I don't have the right degrees or credential, or I've got wackadoodle thoughts and questions about things. It's exactly those crazy thoughts that is exactly what the world needs. And so our spiritual growth, it's going to mean that we're going to have to develop our inner knowing, our inner authority, and it requires our heart to get involved. But I want to give you a caveat. When God gets a hold of your heart, it'll break. But it'll break for the same things that break God's heart. Violence against people, exclusion, injustice and misogyny, all those things that make people less than they could be, all those things that are possessing us and making us smaller. And God comes and casts them out. Casts them out right here at this table, where you can come and you can eat this bread and you can drink from this cup. You can. Even if you don't think you can, you can. I can. And we can, and we're welcomed at this table. And all our isms and our unclean spirits are taken away.